In the frost-covered Ardennes forest, a small reconnaissance squad was about to secure key terrain before an anticipated German offensive. A routine recon mission turned deadly when German forces launched a perfectly orchestrated ambush from positions that shouldn't have existed. Lieutenant James Carter wasn't your typical infantry officer. For years he had been a skilled tactical leader, known for his ability to adapt under pressure and his unwavering commitment to his men. When German Major Konrad Weiss sprung his trap, he had no idea they were facing a commander who would refuse to surrender even when outgunned and surrounded. Carter's desperate pivot from escape to sabotage would trigger a chain of events that could save thousands of Allied lives. What began as a betrayal through faulty intelligence would become a test of leadership, loyalty, and sacrifice. The battle lines of the Western Front would never be the same after a handful of determined soldiers turned catastrophic failure into vital strategic success. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches, you make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The cold bit through Lieutenant James Carter's gloves as he unfolded the map against a frost-coated pine. Dawn had barely broken over the Ardennes forest, painting the snow in pale blues and grays. His breath clouded before him as he traced their route with a gloved finger. Intelligence says we've got clear passage through this valley, he murmured, more to himself than to Sergeant Frank O'Reilly, who stood beside him, rifle cradled against his chest. German forces are concentrated here and here. Carter tapped 2 points well north of their position. Should be minimal resistance. O'Reilly's weathered face remained impassive, eyes constantly scanning the tree line. The Irishman had survived Normandy and the push through France. He'd developed an instinct for trouble that Carter had learned to respect. "You believe that, Lieutenant?" O'Reilly asked, his voice carrying that hard edge it always had before an operation. Carter folded the map carefully, tucking it inside his jacket. "Command's intelligence has been solid so far. No reason to doubt it now." O'Reilly spat into the snow. "Germans are desperate. Desperate means unpredictable." Carter checked his sidearm, then nodded toward their waiting men. "Let's move. Out. I want Walker on point." The squad emerged from their temporary camp like shadows. 8 men tasked with securing key terrain before the anticipated German counteroffensive. Routine recon, they'd been told. Vital, but straightforward. Corporal Danny Tex Walker moved. Ahead, his lanky frame surprisingly graceful as he navigated the snow-covered forest floor. The Texan was their best scout, eagle-eyed and possessed of an almost supernatural calm under pressure. Behind him came the rest. O'Reilly, solid as iron. Specialists Wilson and Ramirez, both quiet professionals, the Graham twins, inseparable even in combat. And bringing up the rear, Private Michael Hayes, Mikey to everyone, their fresh-faced replacement who'd only joined the unit 3 weeks prior. Mikey trudged forward, his oversized pack making him look even younger than his 19 years. Carter had caught him writing letters home by flashlight the night before. Descriptions of Belgian forests and promises to his mother that he was keeping warm. The letter had ended with a hesitant question. "Do you think we'll be home by Easter?" 2 hours into their advance, Carter began to notice it, an uneasiness that crept through his squad like a cold draft. Walker's regular signals became less frequent, his movements more cautious. The forest had grown unnaturally still, devoid of the usual chittering of wildlife. Carter moved forward to where Walker had stopped, crouched behind the massive trunk of a fallen oak. "Something's off, Lieutenant," Walker whispered, his Texan drawl barely audible. He pointed to a ridgeline that bordered the valley. "That terrain's all wrong. Map shows a gradual slope, but that's a sharp incline. And those tank tracks," he gestured to faint impressions in the churned mud and snow. "Those ain't ours. Wrong tread pattern." Carter pulled out his binoculars, scanning the valley ahead. The positions should have shown evidence of recent Allied patrols, but there was nothing. Just pristine snow blanketing the ground between scattered pines. "How recent are those tracks?" he asked. Walker shook his head. Hard to tell with the frost, but not more than a day old. Carter felt the first prickle of doubt crawl up his spine. He glanced back at his men, spread out in textbook formation, awaiting his signal. "Pull back," he ordered quietly. "We need to..." The first shell exploded 50 yards to their right, sending dirt and splinters rocketing through the air. Before the sound had even faded, machine gun fire erupted from 3 directions, cutting through the trees with mechanical precision. "Ambush!" O'Reilly's voice boomed over the chaos. "Get down!" Carter dove behind the fallen oak as bullets splintered bark inches from his head. Through the gunfire and shouting, he heard a sickening sound, the wet thud of rounds finding flesh. Wilson went down first, his chest erupting in a spray of red that steamed in the cold air. One of the Graham twins, Carter couldn't tell which, crumpled, face first into the snow, half his head missing. "Fall back!" Carter screamed, firing blindly toward the nearest machine gun nest. "Into the trees, move!" O'Reilly was already in motion, dragging Ramirez, who clutched a bloody shoulder. Walker had disappeared into the underbrush, his rifle cracking rhythmically as he provided covering fire. Carter turned to see Mikey Hayes frozen in place, standing fully exposed as bullets whizzed past him. The kid's face was blank with shock, his rifle hanging uselessly at his side. "Hayes!" Carter sprinted toward him, staying low. "Move, damn it!" The kid didn't respond. His eyes were wide, mouth slightly open, as though he were witnessing something beyond comprehension. Carter reached him, grabbed his jacket, and yanked him down just as a burst of fire tore through the space where he'd been standing. "You stay with me, understand?" Carter growled, their faces inches apart. "Stay with me and move." Something in Mikey's eyes shifted, fear giving way to primal survival instinct. He nodded jerkily. "Go." Carter shoved him toward where O'Reilly was providing covering fire. They retreated in bounds, one group providing cover while the other fell back. Somewhere to their right, Walker's rifle continued its steady report. The surviving Graham twin dragged his brother's body until O'Reilly barked at him to leave it. "He's gone, son. Move or you join him." More explosions rocked the forest as mortar shells began to fall. The Germans had their range dialed in perfectly, as though they'd been expecting them, waiting for them. Each blast sent snow and dirt showering down through the pine branches, the concussion pulverizing the air in their lungs. Carter's radio operator was down, sprawled awkwardly against a tree trunk, the radio on his back shattered by shrapnel. Carter pulled the handset free anyway, desperately turning dials, but received only crackling static in return. "Radio's gone," he shouted to O'Reilly, who was reloading behind a boulder. "The whole damn mission's gone," O'Reilly shot back, slamming a fresh magazine into his rifle. This was a setup. They retreated deeper into the forest, the German fire still pursuing them, but growing less accurate as the trees thickened. After 20 minutes of hard running, Carter signaled a halt in a small depression ringed by dense pines. He did a quick count. 5 of them left: himself, O'Reilly, Walker, the remaining Graham, and Mikey, who sat shivering uncontrollably against a tree. Walker materialized from between the trees, his face streaked with dirt and sweat despite the cold. "They're still coming," he reported, his voice tight. 2 squads, maybe more. Moving cautious, but they've got dogs. Carter nodded grimly. "Did you see their insignia? Any indication of unit?" "Couldn't tell for sure, but these ain't just regular Wehrmacht. The way they set up that ambush." Walker shook his head. "They knew exactly where we'd be." O'Reilly spat again. "Our intelligence was garbage, or we've been sold out." Carter unfolded his map with trembling hands, trying to make sense of their position. Nothing aligned. The terrain features, the German positions, all of it contradicted what they'd been told. It was as though they'd been handed a map to a different forest entirely. "Lieutenant," O'Reilly's voice cut through his thoughts. "What's the play?" The men were looking at him now, faces haggard with shock and exhaustion. Even Mikey had stopped shivering long enough to fix him with desperate eyes. Carter felt the weight of command press down on him like a physical force. He'd led them into this. His confidence in their intelligence had brought them here, into this killing ground. Now 4 of his men were dead, and the rest were looking to him for a way out. "We're in German territory," Carter said, struggling to keep his voice steady, miles behind their lines with no radio contact. "The mission..." He swallowed hard. "The mission is scrapped. But we still have vital intelligence on German positions." O'Reilly snorted. Intelligence that's clearly wrong. No. Carter shook his head. Not wrong. Reversed. They knew our route because they fed it to us. We've got the actual German positions right here, right now. We've seen them. That's what we need to get back to command. And how do we do that, Lieutenant? The remaining Graham twin asked, his voice hollow with grief. We're surrounded. Carter looked each man in the eye before answering. We adapt. We move fast, we stay quiet, and we use their territory against them. They think they've got us pinned, but they don't know these woods any better than we do. A distant sound drifted through the trees, the baying of tracking dogs. The Germans were closing in. We move north, Carter decided, pointing to a ridge, line barely visible through the trees. There's an Allied observation post 10 miles past that ridge. If we can reach it, if we live that long, O'Reilly muttered. Walker checked his ammunition. We've got maybe 200 rounds between us. 5 grenades. Carter nodded grimly. Then we make every shot count. He turned to Mikey, who still looked shell-shocked. Hayes, you stick with Sergeant O'Reilly. Do exactly as he says when he says it. Mikey nodded numbly. Let's move. Walker, take point. Keep us 50 yards ahead of those dogs. As they melted into the dense forest, Carter felt the weight of his failure pressing down on him with each step. He'd trusted the maps, trusted commands, intelligence. Now his men were paying for that trust with their lives. And somewhere out there, a German commander had orchestrated this perfect trap, this devastating ambush that had shattered his unit in minutes. Carter vowed that if they survived, he'd find the man responsible. But first they had to make it through the night. As the distant sound of dogs grew louder, he knew that even that simple goal might be beyond their reach. The snow began to fall again, thick flakes drifting through the darkening forest. Behind them, the German pursuit continued, relentless as the coming night. The snow had stopped falling, but darkness settled over the Ardennes like a shroud. Carter pressed his back against the massive trunk of an ancient oak, listening to the forest. The distant barking of dogs carried through the frigid air, sometimes fading, then growing stronger as the wind shifted. They were still being hunted. They're circling back, Walker whispered, materializing beside Carter like a ghost. The Texan's eyes reflected pinpoints of moonlight filtering through the branches. 2 patrols. One with dogs, one without. They've split up to cover more ground. Carter nodded, feeling the ache of fatigue deep in his bones. They'd been moving for hours, changing direction frequently to throw off pursuit. His men were exhausted, cold, and dangerously close to breaking. 50 yards away, hidden in a shallow ravine, O'Reilly sat with Mikey and Graham, checking their dwindling supplies. The Irishman's face was a mask of grim determination as he divided ammunition among their remaining weapons. How much time do we have? Carter asked. Walker considered this, his breath forming small clouds in the freezing air. Dog patrols about, half a mile southwest. The other group's closer, maybe quarter mile east. Moving slow, careful-like. He paused. We could make a run for it, head north, but the dogs would pick up our trail, Carter finished, and we'd leave tracks in the snow. Walker nodded. The unspoken reality hung between them. They couldn't outrun their pursuers forever. Carter made his way back to the ravine, sliding down the embankment to join the others. O'Reilly looked up, his eyes hard in the dim light. What's the word, Lieutenant? They're still on us, Carter replied, keeping his voice low. 2 patrols, converging. O'Reilly cursed under his breath. We need to make a decision. Either we keep running until they catch us, or we find that observation post and try to make contact. The OP's at least 10 miles away, Graham interjected, his voice hollow with exhaustion. Since losing his brother, the soldier had become a shell of himself, operating on instinct and muscle memory. We'd never make it before daybreak. They'd spot us in open terrain. Mikey sat shivering, arms wrapped around his knees. The shock of the ambush had faded, replaced by a 1,000-yard stare that worried Carter more than outright panic. Lieutenant? O'Reilly leaned in, voice dropping even lower. We need to consider the reality. This mission is blown. Our best chance is to scatter, Try to make it back individually. 5 men leave 5 different trails, some of us might make it. Carter felt a flare of anger. We're not splitting up, Sergeant. With all due respect, sir, 4 of our men are already dead. How many more need to die before? I said we're not splitting up. Carter cut him off, the steel in his voice silencing even the hardened veteran. We were sent to gather intelligence, and that's exactly what we're going to do. O'Reilly's jaw clenched, but he nodded curtly. Yes, sir. Walker slid down into the ravine, landing silently beside them. Patrol's changing course. They're heading this way. Carter felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. How long? 10 minutes, maybe less. Walker checked his rifle. I can lead them off. Buy you some time. Carter considered their options, each worse than the last. Running meant leaving. Tracks. Staying meant certain discovery. Fighting meant expending precious ammunition against superior numbers. A thought struck him. The patrol without dogs. How many? Walker's eyes narrowed. 4, maybe 5. Standard Wehrmacht infantry from what I could see. Carter looked to O'Reilly, who immediately understood his thinking. We ambush them, the sergeant said. Take their uniforms, their supplies, and their radio if they have one, Carter added. O'Reilly nodded, his expression shifting from resignation to grim calculation. Walker and I can handle it. You stay with the kid and Graham. Carter shook his head. I'm coming with you. Graham, we'll watch Hayes. For a moment, O'Reilly looked like he might argue, but instead he checked his knife, ensuring it would slide free easily from its sheath. Walker did the same, his movements methodical, almost ritualistic. No gunfire, Carter reminded them. Noise travels too far in this cold. They moved through the forest like shadows, following Walker's lead. The Texan kept them downwind of the approaching patrol, using the terrain to mask their approach. Carter's heart hammered in his chest, each breath seeming impossibly loud. In the still night air, the German patrol appeared through the trees, 4 soldiers moving in a loose formation, rifles at the ready. They were clearly on high alert, but the darkness and fatigue had made them predictable. They followed the path of least resistance through the underbrush, inadvertently walking straight into the trap. Carter gave the signal, and the 3 of them split up, encircling the patrol. Walker took position in a thicket 30 yards ahead, while O'Reilly circled to the right. Carter waited until the Germans had passed his position, then followed silently. The moment stretched, his pulse a drumbeat in his ears. Then Walker struck. The Texan rose from the underbrush directly in the path of the lead soldier, his movement so sudden the German had no time to raise his rifle. Walker's knife flashed once in the moonlight, and the soldier crumpled, his dying gasp lost in the bitter wind. Before the others could react, O'Reilly attacked from the flank. His large frame belied his speed. He took down one soldier with a savage blow to the throat, then buried his knife in the chest of a second. The 4th German managed to bring his rifle around, but Carter was already on him. The training took over, a sharp twist to disarm, followed by a quick thrust of his knife. The soldier's eyes widened in shock, then emptied as he slid to the ground. In less than 20 seconds, it was over. 4 men lay dead in the snow, which was already darkening with their blood. Check them for anything useful, Carter ordered, his voice sounding strange to his own ears. The calm efficiency with which they'd just killed 4 men disturbed him, more than he wanted to admit. Walker knelt beside one of the bodies, rifling through pockets with practiced hands. No radio, he reported. But they've got rations, ammunition that'll fit our rifles. O'Reilly was already stripping one of the uniforms. German wool's warmer than our gear. We should take the coats at least. They worked quickly, gathering everything of value. Carter found a map on one of the officers, newer than their own. He tucked it inside his jacket. We need to move, Walker said, suddenly alert. The dog patrol changed direction. They must have been supposed to rendezvous with these men. They rushed back to where Graham and Mikey waited, laden with their grim spoils. Carter's mind raced as they distributed the supplies. The German map showed positions that contradicted their intelligence entirely. If it was accurate, the German offensive wasn't coming from where Allied command expected. It was already in motion, from a completely different axis of attack. "We need to get this information back," he told O'Reilly, showing him the map. "This changes everything." O'Reilly studied it briefly, then nodded. "There's a forward listening post here." He tapped a spot on the map. 6 miles, maybe 7. Better chance than the observation post. "That's our target then," Carter decided. "We move now. Try to put distance between us and—" A distant scream cut through the night, human, filled with pain and terror. It echoed briefly, then was cut short. Carter felt the hair on the back of his neck rise. The other patrol, Walker guessed. Someone got to them before we did. O'Reilly's hand went to his rifle. Or they found something they didn't like. They waited, tense, as minutes crawled by. The forest had gone completely silent, even the distant barking of dogs now absent. "We should move," Carter finally said. "Head for the listening post. If we push hard, we might make it before—" "Lieutenant," Walker interrupted, his voice unnaturally tight. "Movement. 3 o'clock. Single figure." They turned as one, weapons raised. A lone figure stumbled through the trees toward them, hands raised in apparent surrender. As the man drew closer, the moonlight revealed a German officer's uniform, now torn and bloodied. "Don't shoot," the man called in heavily accented English. "Please, I am alone." O'Reilly's finger tightened on his trigger. "One more step and you're dead, Kraut." The German stopped, swaying slightly. Blood dripped from a cut above his eye, streaking his face like war paint. "My name is Oberleutnant Hans Richter. I know I have no right to ask for mercy, but I have information. Information your command needs desperately." Carter kept his weapon trained on the German but signaled O'Reilly to hold fire. "What happened to the patrol with the dogs?" A shadow crossed Richter's face. "Major Weiss happened, my commanding officer. I could not stand by any longer. I sabotaged the patrol. The dogs are dead. The men—" He swallowed hard. "The men tried to stop me." "Why would you turn on your own men?" Carter demanded. Richter's eyes, even in the dim light, burned with a terrible intensity. "Because what is coming will be a massacre, not just of soldiers but civilians, women, children. Major Weiss has received new orders. No prisoners. No mercy. The offensive that is coming is not just another battle. It is an atrocity waiting to happen." O'Reilly spat on the ground. "Save the moral crisis, Kraut. You're lying." "Search me," Richter replied evenly. "I am unarmed. Take me prisoner if you wish. Kill me if you must. But first, hear what I know." Carter studied the man. German officers didn't surrender easily, and they certainly didn't betray their own unless something profound had changed. "Mikey, Graham, search him. Walker, watch the perimeter." Carter kept his weapon trained on Richter as the 2 soldiers patted him down. "He's clean, Lieutenant," Graham reported. "No weapons." Richter nodded toward his breast pocket. "There. Inside, look for yourself." Graham carefully extracted a folded paper and handed it to Carter. It was an operations order, stamped with official German seals. Carter's German was rudimentary, but the map attached to the order was clear enough. It showed a massive armor concentration poised to strike through the exact valley they had been sent to secure. "This offensive," Carter began, "begins tomorrow," Richter finished. "Your lines will be smashed, not just here but all along the front. The attack your command anticipates is a feint. The real thrust comes here." He pointed to the valley on the map, exactly where your unit was ambushed. Carter felt a cold dread settle over him. If Richter was telling the truth, thousands of Allied soldiers were about to be caught in the same trap his squad had walked into, but on a catastrophic scale. "Why are you telling us this?" he demanded. Richter's shoulders sagged. "Because there are still men on both sides of this war who remember that we are human beings first, soldiers second. Major Weiss, he does not share this view." O'Reilly moved closer, his face twisted with suspicion. "Convenient that you had a change of heart right when we showed up." "I have been planning this for days," Richter replied, his voice hardening. "Your presence merely accelerated my timeline." I knew patrols were searching for American scouts. When I heard the dogs had found a trail, I made my decision. Carter studied the operations order again. The details were too specific, too consistent with what they had already observed. Either this was an elaborate deception or Richter was telling the truth. We should just shoot him, O'Reilly said flatly. Can't trust a German officer. For all we know, he's leading Weiss right to us. Richter didn't flinch at the threat. If I wanted you dead, Sergeant, I would have let the dog patrol find you. Instead, I killed my own countrymen. An uncomfortable silence fell over the group. Even O'Reilly seemed momentarily at a loss for words. Sir? Mikey spoke up, his voice surprisingly steady. It was the first time he'd spoken since the ambush. I think he's telling the truth. O'Reilly scoffed. And what would you know about it, kid? I know that his hands are shaking, Mikey replied, quietly. And not from the cold. I know what it looks like when someone's just killed for the first time. He's not faking that. Carter looked more closely at Richter and saw that Mikey was right. The German's hands trembled, and behind his determined expression lay the hollow-eyed shock of a man who had crossed a line he never thought he would. We're taking him with us, Carter decided. O'Reilly tensed. Lieutenant, that's an order, Sergeant. Carter's tone left no room for argument. We bring him to the listening post. Let command decide what to do with him and his information. O'Reilly's jaw worked as he visibly fought the urge to argue further. Finally, he nodded stiffly. Yes, sir, but I'll be watching him. One wrong move, and I put a bullet in him myself. Richter accepted this with a grim nod. I expect nothing less. Carter turned to address the group. We move now. Walker on point. O'Reilly takes our guest. Graham and I will flank. Mikey stays in the middle. We maintain spacing and absolute silence. He looked at each man in turn. What we're carrying isn't just intelligence anymore. It could change the course of this battle. Maybe the whole damned war. They moved out, melting into the darkness of the forest. The night was still long, and dawn would bring its own dangers. But for the first time since the ambush, Carter felt something besides desperation, a sense of purpose that burned through the cold and exhaustion. Behind them, somewhere in the vast darkness, Major Weiss was surely organizing a more intensive hunt. Carter could feel the German commander's presence like a shadow at their backs, relentless and determined. As they pushed northward through the snow-laden forest, Carter found himself wondering what kind of man this Weiss was. What drove him? What made him so effective and so feared that it would turn one of his own officers against him? Before this mission was over, Carter suspected he would find out. He checked the luminous dial of his watch. 6 hours until dawn. 6 hours to cover 6 miles through enemy territory. 6 hours before the world changed forever. Beside him, Mikey trudged through the snow, his young face set with newfound determination. Behind them, Richter followed in O'Reilly's watchful shadow, his decision to betray his country with every step he took. And somewhere ahead lay the slim hope of salvation, if they could reach it in time. The forest swallowed them, 5 men and their prisoner, moving like ghosts through the frozen night. Dawn broke reluctantly over the Ardennes, pale light filtering through a low ceiling of gray clouds. The forest gave way to rolling farmland dotted with small clusters of buildings, abandoned villages emptied by the ebb and flow of war. Carter's squad moved from shadow to shadow, using hedgerows and drainage, ditches for cover. Their pace had slowed considerably. Exhaustion dragged at them like lead weights, and the constant vigilance required to avoid detection had frayed their nerves to breaking point. Only the vital intelligence they carried kept them moving forward. Carter crouched behind a stone wall. At the edge of a small village, binoculars trained on the road that cut through the valley below. What he saw confirmed his worst fears. Tank column, he murmured to O'Reilly, who knelt beside him. At least a dozen Panthers, plus support vehicles. O'Reilly took the binoculars, his expression darkening as he surveyed the German armor. Moving into position for the offensive, just as Richter said. Carter glanced back to where the German officer sat under Walker's watchful eye. Despite his capture, Richter maintained a quiet dignity that Carter found himself reluctantly respecting. Doesn't mean we can trust him. O'Reilly handed back the binoculars. Could be feeding us just enough truth to lead us into another trap. Carter studied the road again. The German tanks were pulling off into concealed positions among the trees, expertly camouflaged with netting and branches. Standard deployment for a surprise attack. We need to get to that listening post, he said. With what we know now, Command, could redirect reserves, shore up the defenses. We could stop this before it starts. O'Reilly's laugh was bitter and short. 4 miles through open country in daylight with half the Wehrmacht looking for us? That's suicide, Lieutenant? You have a better idea, Sergeant? O'Reilly's jaw tightened. Yeah. We hole up somewhere till nightfall. Better chance moving in. Darkness. Carter shook his head. The offensive begins at dawn tomorrow. If we wait, the information will be worthless. A tense silence fell between them. Carter was acutely aware of the fracture forming in his squad, O'Reilly's growing doubt, the exhaustion wearing them all down, the presence of Richter as a constant source of mistrust. Walker approached, moving silently despite his fatigue. Village looks clear, he reported. But there are signs of recent German activity. Boot prints, cigarette butts. They've been through here and not long ago. Carter nodded. Any working radios, vehicles? Nothing we could use. Place has been picked clean. Walker glanced at Richter, then back to Carter. But I did find something interesting. There's a German supply map in one of the buildings. Shows fuel depots, ammunition dumps, all positioned to support the offensive. Carter felt a surge of vindication. Another piece of confirmation that Richter's information was legitimate. Show me, he ordered. Walker led them to a small stone building that might once have been a town hall. Inside, spread across a wooden table, was a tactical map marked with German notations. Carter studied it intently, comparing it with the information Richter had provided. It matches, he said finally. Supply routes, staging areas, all consistent with a major offensive through this valley. O'Reilly examined the map, his skepticism giving way to grim acceptance. If this is accurate, our entire front's about to collapse. Which is why we need to get this information back, Carter insisted. Richter approached the table, his hands still bound in front of him. May I? He asked quietly. After a moment's hesitation, Carter nodded. The German leaned forward, examining the map with a professional eye. This confirms what I told you, Richter said. But there's more. The attack will begin with an artillery barrage unprecedented on the Western Front. Your forward positions will be obliterated before the armor even moves. He pointed to several marked locations. These are the primary targets. If your command doesn't reinforce these sectors immediately, thousands will die. Carter felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on him with crushing force. Thousands of lives hanging in the balance, and his small, exhausted squad was their only hope. Mikey appeared in the doorway, his young face drawn with fatigue, but more composed than it had been immediately after the ambush. Graham spotted movement to the west, he reported. Multiple vehicles. Carter quickly folded the map and tucked it inside his jacket alongside Richter's documents. Time to move. They slipped out of the building and back into the maze of narrow streets. The village felt like a ghost town. Doors hanging open, personal, belongings scattered in hasty evacuation, an abandoned child's doll lying face down in the mud, the silent evidence of lives disrupted by the grinding machinery of war. Lieutenant? Graham called softly from his position near a stone wall. 3 trucks coming fast. Carter joined him, peering around the corner. 3 German transport trucks rumbled down the main road, soldiers visible in the back of each. Not a routine patrol. This was a deliberate search party. They're heading straight for us, Carter realized. They must have tracked us to the village. We need to split up, O'Reilly urged. Scatter, rendezvous later. Carter hesitated. Splitting up increased their chances of at least some of them making it through. But it also meant potentially losing the intelligence if any of them were captured. How's our ammunition? He asked instead. Low, Walker reported. Maybe 30. Rounds each, 2 grenades left. Carter made his decision. We stay together, head east through the back of the village, then cut north when we're clear. They moved quickly, darting from building to building as the sound of German trucks grew louder. Carter led them through a courtyard, past an abandoned well, and into a narrow alley that ran behind the main street. The radio operator's pack that O'Reilly had salvaged bounced awkwardly against his back as they ran. They'd been unable to establish contact so far. Atmospheric interference, damaged equipment, or simply bad luck. The radio represented their best hope of warning command without having to physically reach the listening post. As they reached the eastern edge of the village, a shot rang out. The bullet whined off a stone wall inches from Carter's head, showering him with fragments. Contact! Walker dropped to one knee, returning fire with controlled bursts. The German search party had flanked around the village and cut off their escape route. Carter glimpsed movement. 8, maybe 10 soldiers deploying into firing positions. Fall back, he ordered. O'Reilly, try the radio again. They retreated into the cover of a stone barn, bullets splintering the wooden door as they slammed it shut. Graham and Walker took up positions at the windows, firing carefully placed shots to keep the Germans at bay. O'Reilly unslung the radio pack, setting it up with practiced hands. "This is Pathfinder 6 calling any Allied station," he barked into the handset. "Priority message over." Only static answered him. He adjusted dials, tried again. "Pathfinder 6 to any Allied station. We have critical intelligence on enemy offensive. Request immediate relay to command." More static, then a faint voice broke through. "Reading you. Position. We're receiving." O'Reilly's face lit with desperate hope. "Pathfinder 6, we are 5 miles south of Checkpoint Echo. German. Armor massing for major offensive through sector." A bullet smashed through the window, striking the radio with a shower of sparks. O'Reilly cursed viciously as smoke poured from the ruined equipment. "Radio's gone," he reported grimly. Carter felt a surge of despair but forced it down. Did they get any of it? No way to know. O'Reilly kicked the smoldering remains of their last link to Allied command. Outside, the German fire intensified. They were being pinned down deliberately, kept in place while more forces arrived. Carter knew they had minutes at most before they were completely surrounded. Walker fired and a German soldier crumpled. "Last magazine," he reported without emotion. Carter scanned the barn, looking for options. A hayloft ladder led to a second floor, and beyond that he spotted a hole in the roof. "Up there," he ordered. "We can get out through the roof, make for the tree line." They scrambled up the ladder, Richter awkwardly climbing with his bound hands. The hayloft offered a temporary respite from the gunfire below, but bullets were already punching through the wooden walls. "Graham, use the last grenades," Carter directed. "Create a diversion while we get out." Graham nodded, pulling the pins and dropping both grenades through the hayloft opening. The explosions shook the entire building, temporarily silencing the German fire. "Now!" Carter pushed Mikey toward the roof opening first. The young soldier hesitated, then clambered through. Walker followed, then Graham. The sound of boots on the ladder below spurred them on. Carter shoved Richter toward the opening. "Move!" The German officer had just reached the roof when the first enemy soldier appeared at the top of the ladder. O'Reilly fired a burst and the man fell backward, but more were coming. "Lieutenant, go!" O'Reilly urged, firing another burst to keep the Germans back. Carter hesitated, unwilling to leave his sergeant. "For Christ's sake, go!" O'Reilly shoved him toward the opening. "Someone has to get that intel back." Carter squeezed through the roof opening, emerging into the cold daylight. The rest of the squad was already moving across the rooftops, heading for the cover of trees visible 100 yards beyond the village. A burst of gunfire erupted from the barn below, followed by a grunt of pain. Carter turned to see O'Reilly, emerging from the roof opening, blood streaming from his shoulder. "Just a graze," the sergeant gasped as Carter helped him up. "Keep moving." They scrambled across the roof and leapt to an adjacent building, bullets splintering slate tiles around them. The Germans had emerged from the barn and were firing from below, while more soldiers appeared at the far end of the village street. "They're trying to cut us off," Carter realized. "We need to change direction." He led them south across the rooftops, away from their planned escape route. It was a desperate gamble, moving away from the listening post, but potentially breaking contact with their pursuers. They reached the edge of the village and dropped down behind a stone wall, momentarily concealed from German view. Before them stretched open farmland, with a scattered copse of trees about 200 yards away. It was poor cover, but their only option. "We make a break for those trees," Carter decided. "From there, we can circle back toward the listening post." O'Reilly examined his wounded shoulder, wincing as he tested his arm's mobility. "I'll cover you first, then follow." Carter shook his head. "We go together. Walker, you take point. Graham, stay with Richter. I'll help O'Reilly. Mikey, you're on rear guard. Watch for pursuit." They tensed, ready to sprint across the exposed ground. Walker counted down silently on his fingers. 3, 2, 1. Then they were running, boots pounding on the frozen earth. Halfway to the trees, the crack of a rifle shot split the air. Graham stumbled, clutching his leg, but kept moving. More shots followed, kicking up dirt around them. "Sniper," Walker called. "On the church tower." Carter looked back to see a German marksman in the bell tower of the village church, methodically, working the bolt of his rifle for another shot. "Keep moving," he shouted. They reached the trees as more bullets whipped through the branches around them. It wasn't the dense cover of the forest, just a small woodlot that provided minimal concealment. They wouldn't be safe here for long. Graham collapsed against a tree trunk, his pant leg soaked with blood. Walker quickly examined the wound. "Clean through," he reported. "Missed the artery, but he can't run on it." Carter felt the situation spiraling out of control. 2 wounded men, minimal ammunition, and German forces closing in from multiple directions. "There's a farmhouse," Mikey said suddenly, pointing north. "About half a mile. I saw it from the rooftop." Carter remembered seeing it on their map. An isolated structure that might offer temporary shelter and a defensible position. "That's our target," he decided. "Walker, help Graham. O'Reilly, can you make it?" Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The sergeant nodded grimly, pressing a field dressing against his shoulder wound. "I've had worse paper cuts." They moved through the small grove of trees and emerged onto open ground again. The farmhouse was visible now, a sturdy 2-story stone building with a partially collapsed roof, surrounded by a low stone wall. Signs of battle scarred its walls, but it remained largely intact. "They'll expect us to go there," O'Reilly warned. "It's obvious. Which is why we'll set it up as a proper defensive position," Carter replied. "Not just a hiding place." They staggered. Across the frozen fields, exhaustion and injury slowing their pace. Behind them, they could hear vehicles, the Germans regrouping for pursuit. Carter estimated they had perhaps 15 minutes before they would be discovered. The farmhouse loomed closer. As they approached, Carter could see that it had already seen combat. Bullet holes pockmarked the walls, and one corner showed damage from artillery. But the stone construction had withstood the punishment, providing a shell of protection they desperately needed. They entered through a rear door, weapons ready, but the house was empty. The interior showed signs of hasty abandonment. Furniture overturned, personal belongings scattered. A layer of dust covered everything, disturbed only by the tracks of small animals. "Walker, check upstairs," Carter ordered. "O'Reilly, see if there's a cellar or any supplies we can use. Graham, stay with Richter. Mikey, help me barricade these windows." They worked quickly, pushing furniture against doors and windows, creating firing positions with clear fields of view. Carter knew they couldn't hold off a determined German assault for long, but they might buy enough time to plan their next move. Walker returned from upstairs. 2 bedrooms, both with good views of the approach, roofs damaged in one corner, but the structure's sound. O'Reilly emerged from a door leading to a root cellar. Found some canned goods, couple of bottles of wine. No weapons or ammunition, though. Carter nodded, surveying their work. The farmhouse wasn't a fortress, but it was better than being caught in the open. He checked his watch, mid-afternoon already. If they could hold out until nightfall, they might have a chance to slip away under cover of darkness. Graham sat propped against a wall, his wounded legs stretched out before him. His face was pale from blood loss, but he continued to check and clean his weapon with mechanical precision. Richter stood by a window, peering through a narrow gap in the barricade. Despite being their prisoner, he had worked alongside them without complaint, helping to move furniture and reinforce defenses. Major Weiss will not give up easily, the German said quietly. He knows what you carry, what we know. Who is this Weiss? Carter asked. Why is he so determined? Richter's expression darkened. Major Konrad Weiss is a true believer, not just in Germany but in the vision of what Germany should be. Efficient, ruthless, purified of weakness. He paused. He was my commanding officer for 2 years. I watched him execute civilians for minor infractions, burn villages as examples, always with the same calm expression. And you followed his orders, O'Reilly said accusingly. Richter did not flinch from the accusation. Yes, until I could no longer reconcile his actions with my conscience. He looked at Carter. You asked why he is so determined, because to him failure is weakness, and Weiss destroys weakness wherever he finds it, in the enemy, in civilians, in his own men. A chill ran through Carter at the description. He had faced many German officers during the campaign, but Weiss sounded like something different, something more akin to the SS than regular Wehrmacht. Lieutenant, Mikey called from his position at an upstairs window. Vehicles approaching from the south. Carter joined him, peering through the cracked glass. 3 German trucks had stopped about 500 yards away, disgorging soldiers who immediately began to deploy into a skirmish line. They found us, he said grimly. O'Reilly, get up here with Graham's rifle. Walker, take the east window. Mikey, stay here and conserve ammunition. Shoot only when you have a clear target. He hurried downstairs to check the ground floor defenses. Graham had dragged himself to a position covering the rear door, his face gray with pain but determined. What about me? Richter asked. I can fight. Carter hesitated. Giving a weapon to a German officer, even one who claimed to have defected, went against every instinct of his training. Lieutenant, Richter pressed, I know I have not earned your trust, but I have sealed my fate by helping you. There is no going back for me. After a moment's deliberation, Carter handed Richter his sidearm. One wrong move, and your sergeant will gladly kill me, Richter finished. I understand. From upstairs came the crack of rifle fire, O'Reilly engaging the approaching Germans. Carter took position at a ground floor window, sighting down his rifle at the advancing enemy troops. Hold fire until they're within 100 yards, he called out. Make every shot count. The German soldiers advanced methodically, using every available bit of cover. These were experienced combat troops, not green replacements. Carter counted at least 20 men, with more likely in reserve. The first German reached the stone wall surrounding the farmyard. Carter squeezed his trigger, and the man crumpled. More shots rang out from upstairs as O'Reilly and Walker engaged. Targets. For a moment, the German advance faltered. Then came the distinctive chatter of a machine gun forcing them back from the windows as bullets shattered glass and splintered wood. The Germans were setting up crew-served weapons to suppress the farmhouse while their infantry maneuvered closer. They're flanking east, Walker called from above, using the barn for cover. Carter adjusted his position, trying to get an angle on the new threat. The Germans were executing a textbook encirclement, pinning them with frontal fire while other elements moved to cut off escape. In minutes, they would be completely surrounded. A tremendous crash shook the building as something heavy struck the east wall. Carter staggered, catching himself against a table. Dust and mortar fragments rained down from the ceiling. What the hell was that? O'Reilly shouted. Panzerfaust, Richter called back. Anti-tank rocket. Another impact rocked the farmhouse, opening a jagged hole in the wall. Cold air rushed in along with the acrid smell of explosives. The Germans were systematically demolishing their cover. Upstairs is compromised. Walker shouted, appearing at the top of the stairs. "Roof's coming down." Carter's mind raced through their dwindling options. They couldn't stay and fight, not against these odds, with their ammunition nearly gone. But leaving meant crossing, open ground under heavy fire. The cellar, he decided. Everyone to the cellar now. They retreated as the German assault intensified. O'Reilly practically carried Graham, whose wound had reopened in the chaos. Mikey stumbled down the stairs, wide-eyed with panic but still clutching his rifle. The root cellar was small and dark, with a low ceiling supported by heavy wooden beams. A narrow door at the back appeared to lead to a drainage culvert. "Where does that go?" Carter asked, pointing to the door. O'Reilly shook his head. "Not sure. I didn't check it earlier." Walker was already examining it. Locks rusted, might lead out to the fields behind the house. Above them, the sound of German soldiers entering the farmhouse spurred them to action. Carter and Walker put their shoulders against the cellar door, forcing the rusted hinges to give way. Beyond lay a narrow tunnel, likely a drainage system for the fields during spring floods. It was barely large enough for a man to crawl through, and pitch black beyond the first few feet. "This is our only chance," Carter said. "Walker, you lead. Then Mikey, Graham, Richter, O'Reilly. I'll bring up the rear." Walker nodded grimly and slithered into the tunnel head first. Mikey followed, his slight frame making the tight passage marginally easier for him. Graham's wounded leg presented a problem. He gritted his teeth as they helped him into the tunnel, but it was clear the confined space would be torture for him. "Go," he said, pulling his last magazine from his pocket and handing it to Carter. "I'll buy you some time." "Not happening," Carter replied firmly. "Everyone gets out or no one does." With O'Reilly pushing from behind and Richter pulling from ahead, they managed to get Graham into the tunnel. The injured soldier's face was a mask of pain, but he made no sound as they dragged him through the confined space. O'Reilly went next, his wounded shoulder making his progress awkward and slow. Richter hesitated at the entrance, looking back at Carter. "Lieutenant, I hear them on the stairs. You should go first." Carter shook his head. "Get in the tunnel, Richter. That's an order." The German nodded once, then crawled into the darkness. Carter was about to follow when the cellar door burst open. 2 German soldiers appeared, weapons raised. Carter fired his last rounds, dropping both men, then dove into the tunnel as more soldiers poured down the stairs. Bullets ricocheted off the stone floor behind him as he crawled frantically after his men. The tunnel seemed endless, a claustrophobic nightmare of damp earth and stale air. Carter's lungs burned with exertion, his muscles screaming as he forced himself forward on elbows and knees. Behind him, he could hear German voices growing fainter. They had discovered the tunnel, but weren't immediately following, perhaps fearing an ambush in the confined space. After what felt like hours but was likely only minutes, Carter felt cool air on his face. The tunnel widened, then opened into a drainage ditch at the edge of a field. The rest of his squad was already there, gathering their bearings in the fading afternoon light. "Everyone here?" Carter asked, doing a quick head count. O'Reilly nodded. "All accounted for. But the Germans know where we came out. They'll be coming around the farmhouse any minute." Carter scanned their surroundings. They were on the north side of the farmhouse, partially concealed by the drainage ditch. To their east lay more open fields. To the west, about half a mile away, the forest began again, dense and dark. "We make for the forest," he decided. "It's our only chance." They helped Graham to his feet. The wounded soldier swayed but remained, standing with O'Reilly's support. Mikey appeared calmer now, his initial panic subsiding into a kind of numb determination. "Wait," Walker said suddenly, his keen eyes fixed on the farmhouse. "Something's happening." They watched as the German soldiers who had been searching for them suddenly began to withdraw, loading back into their vehicles with apparent urgency. "They're pulling out," O'Reilly said in disbelief. "Why would they?" A distant rumble cut him off, the unmistakable sound of heavy vehicles approaching from the east. Through gaps in the hedgerow, they glimpsed the distinctive silhouettes of German armor. Panzer column, Richter identified them. Moving into final positions for tomorrow's offensive. Carter understood immediately. The search party had been recalled to avoid interfering with the main battle group. It wasn't that they were giving up the hunt. They simply had higher priorities. "This is our chance," he said. "They'll be focused on getting their armor into position. We can slip through while they're distracted." They moved as quickly as Graham's injury would allow, staying low in the drainage ditch that ran along the edge of the field. The rumble of German tanks grew louder, punctuated by shouted orders and the squeal of metal tracks. As they neared the edge of the forest, disaster struck. A German patrol appeared directly in their path, a lieutenant and 4 soldiers, likely an advanced security element for the tank column. Both groups froze in momentary shock at the unexpected encounter. Then everything happened at once. Walker fired first, dropping one German with a clean headshot. O'Reilly pushed Graham behind cover and engaged another. Mikey, in a moment of panic, stood frozen in the open, his rifle half raised. The German lieutenant aimed directly at Mikey. Carter shouted a warning, but it was too late to reach the young soldier. In that split second, Richter lunged forward, slamming into Mikey and knocking him aside as the German's bullet found flesh. Richter grunted in pain, clutching his side where the bullet had struck him. Walker eliminated the remaining Germans with cold efficiency, then dragged Richter into the cover of the trees as Carter and O'Reilly followed with Graham and Mikey. They retreated deeper into the forest, the sounds of the German tank column fading behind them. Only when Carter was certain they weren't being pursued did he call a halt. Richter sat heavily against a tree trunk, his hand pressed to the bloody wound in his side. "Not fatal," he assessed through gritted teeth. "But I will slow you down." Carter knelt beside him, examining the injury. The bullet had entered just below the ribs, but there was no exit wound. It was lodged somewhere inside. "Why did you do that?" Mikey asked, his voice small with shock. "You could have let me die." Richter regarded the young soldier with tired eyes. "Because you reminded me of my brother. Too young for this war. Too good for it." Carter tore strips, from his undershirt to bandage Richter's wound. The German winced but made no sound of complaint. "How much farther to the listening post?" Walker asked, keeping watch at the edge of their small clearing. 3 miles, maybe 4, Carter replied. "Northwest from here." O'Reilly helped Graham to a more comfortable position, then joined Carter. "Lieutenant, we need to talk," he said quietly. "Graham can barely walk. Richter's hit. We're down to our last few rounds of ammunition. The mission is compromised." "What? Are you suggesting, Sergeant?" O'Reilly's face was hard. "I'm suggesting we need to be realistic. We split up. The 2 most mobile take the intelligence and make a run for it. The rest create a diversion." Carter stared at him. "You're talking about sacrificing half the squad." "I'm talking about completing the mission," O'Reilly countered. "Isn't that what you've been driving us toward? Getting this intelligence back no matter the cost?" Carter felt the weight of command bearing down on him with crushing force. O'Reilly wasn't wrong. The mission parameters would justify exactly what he was suggesting, but something in Carter rebelled at the cold calculus of it. "No," he said, finally. "We started together. We finished together." "That's not leadership," O'Reilly argued, his voice rising. "That's sentimentality. We have a responsibility. Our responsibility is to each other, as much as to command." Carter cut him off. "I've lost enough men on this mission. I won't abandon any more." The 2 men stared at each other, the tension palpable. Then, to Carter's surprise, Richter spoke up from where he sat propped against the tree. "Lieutenant Carter is right," the German said, "and Major Weiss is wrong. This is the difference between you and him. He would sacrifice anyone without hesitation, but that is not strength. It is merely efficiency without humanity." O'Reilly looked from Richter to Carter, then shook his head in frustrated resignation. "Fine. But if we're all going to die for this principle of yours, Lieutenant, I hope it's worth it." Carter had no answer for that. Instead, he turned his attention to their immediate needs. "We rest here for 30 minutes, then continue northwest. Walker, keep watch. O'Reilly, check our supplies. Mikey, help me with these wounds." As they worked, Carter found himself studying Richter, the enemy who had saved one of his men, who now bled from a wound he'd taken in Mikey's place. The lines between friend and foe, so clear at the start of this mission, had blurred beyond recognition. The forest grew darker as evening approached. In the distance, they could hear the continuing rumble of German armor moving into position, the opening moves of an offensive that would claim thousands of lives unless they could warn command in time. Carter checked his watch. Less than 12 hours until the German attack would begin. 12 hours to cover the remaining distance to the listening post, with 2 wounded men and a German defector in tow, while being hunted by a commander who seemed to embody the darkest aspects of the enemy they fought. As if reading his thoughts, Richter spoke quietly. Weiss will not stop. Not after coming this close. Carter nodded grimly. I'm counting on it. What do you mean? Walker asked, rejoining them from his watch position. Carter surveyed his battered squad, exhausted, wounded, pushed beyond the limits of endurance, but still fighting, still believing in the mission and in each other. I mean, we can't keep running, he said. It's time we took the fight to Major Weiss. In the gathering darkness, his words hung in the air, a declaration of intent that would either save them or doom them all. Night had fallen completely now, the forest a maze of shadows and whispers. Carter crouched at the edge of a small clearing, studying the German supply depot through his binoculars. Behind him, his battered squad waited in tense silence, their faces pale smudges in the darkness. Tekir. Depot sprawled before them, a collection of hastily constructed buildings and tents surrounded by a perimeter of barbed wire. Trucks came and went, loaded with ammunition, fuel, and supplies for the coming offensive. Armed guards patrolled in regular patterns, their breath forming small clouds in the frigid air. Floodlights bathed parts of the compound in harsh white light, creating pockets of blinding illumination surrounded by impenetrable darkness. Main fuel storage is on the eastern side, Richter whispered, pointing toward a cluster of large drums. Ammunition bunkers to the north, command tent in the center with the radio equipment. Carter lowered his binoculars, weighing their options. They had abandoned the direct route to the listening post, recognizing that German patrols had effectively sealed that path. Instead, following Carter's instinct, they had circled back toward the heart of the German advance. If we can disrupt their supply lines, he had explained to his skeptical squad, we might delay the offensive long enough for Allied forces to prepare, and create enough chaos for us to slip through their lines. Now, facing the reality of the heavily guarded depot, even Carter felt a flicker of doubt. What do you think? He asked O'Reilly, who lay beside him studying the German positions. The sergeant's face was grim. 20, maybe 30 guards, regular patrols, decent fields of fire. He glanced at Carter. In other words, suicide. Not if we're smart about it, Carter replied. We don't need to destroy everything, just create enough damage to disrupt their timetable. He turned to Walker, who had crawled forward to join them. What did you find? The Texan had spent the last hour scouting the perimeter of the depot, moving like a shadow through the underbrush. Blind spot on the northwest corner, he reported. Guard tower there is unmanned. Probably a personnel shortage. Wire looks cuttable. Biggest problem will be the open ground, about 30 yards from the tree line to the perimeter. Carter nodded thoughtfully. And what about weapons? Explosives? Walker's expression tightened. Found a dead German engineer about half a mile back. Had a satchel charge and some blasting caps. I grabbed what I could. Carter felt a grim satisfaction. At last, some luck in their favor. That gives us something to work with. He turned to Richter. If you were going to cripple this depot with limited explosives, where would you hit? The German officer considered the question carefully. The fuel drums would create the most spectacular explosion, but they're too well guarded. The command tent would disrupt communications but wouldn't delay the offensive materially. He pointed to a spot near the center of the compound. There, the dispatch station. It coordinates all supply movements. Destroy that, and the entire distribution system falls into chaos for at least 24 hours. Carter studied the target through his binoculars, a single-story wooden structure with a radio antenna rising from its roof. 2 guards at the entrance, but otherwise unprotected compared to the ammunition and fuel areas. That's our primary target. he decided. But we'll need a diversion to draw off some of the guards. O'Reilly, despite his earlier skepticism, was already thinking tactically. We could trigger a small explosion on the far side of the camp, make them think they're being attacked from the east while we hit them from the west. Carter nodded. We'll need to split into teams. One for the diversion, one for the main target, one to cover our escape route. I'm not sure splitting up is wise, Walker said quietly. We're already short-handed. Carter surveyed what remained of his squad. Graham could barely walk, though. He insisted he could still fight. Richter's wound had slowed him, but the German officer remained clear-headed and determined. Mikey had grown steadier over the past hours, finding some inner reserve of courage. O'Reilly and Walker were their strongest assets, experienced, deadly, and despite their doubts, loyal. We don't have the numbers to hit everything at once if we stay together, Carter explained. This is our best chance. After a moment of consideration, Walker nodded his acceptance. O'Reilly's face remained impassive, but he raised no further objections. Carter outlined his plan. O'Reilly, you and Graham create the diversion on the eastern perimeter. Something noisy but controlled. Walker, you and I will infiltrate from the northwest and hit the dispatch station. Mikey, you stay with Richter and secure our escape route back to the forest. You're trusting the kid with the German? O'Reilly asked skeptically. I'm trusting Mikey to do his job, Carter replied evenly, meeting the young soldier's eyes. And Richter has earned at least the benefit of the doubt. They synchronized watches. 1:15 midnight. The diversion would be triggered at 00:30 hours, giving Carter and Walker 15 minutes to get into position. If anything goes wrong, don't wait, Carter instructed them. Fall back to the rendezvous point we discussed. If we're not there by 0200, assume we're not coming and continue toward Allied lines. The gravity of what they were attempting settled over the group. This wasn't a desperate flight from pursuit anymore. They were deliberately striking at the heart of the German advance, with minimal resources and wounded personnel. I know I've asked more of you than anyone has a right to expect, Carter said quietly. But what we do tonight could save thousands of lives. Save the speeches for the brass, Lieutenant, O'Reilly said. But there was something like respect in his tone. Let's just get it done. They separated, moving to their assigned positions with the silent efficiency of men who had fought together through hell. Carter and Walker crept along the western edge of the depot, staying low in the underbrush. The cold bit through their inadequate clothing, but the discomfort was a distant concern compared to the danger that lay ahead. They reached the northwest corner of the perimeter, where Walker had identified the blind spot. The unmanned guard tower loomed above them, its searchlight dark. Beyond the barbed wire fence, they could see the dispatch station, a single-story wooden building with light spilling from its windows. Walker produced a pair of wire cutters taken from the dead engineer. Ready when you are, Lieutenant. Carter checked his watch. 0025 hours. 5 minutes until O'Reilly's diversion. Let's do it. Walker made short work of the barbed wire, creating a gap just large enough for them to slip through. They waited at the edge of the tree line, watching the patrol patterns of the guards. Remember, Carter whispered. In and out. Place the charges, set the timers, and get clear. No heroics. Walker nodded, his face a mask of concentration. In the pale moonlight, the Texan looked older than his years, the carefree ranch hand completely subsumed by the hardened soldier. At precisely 0030, a flash of light erupted from the eastern side of the depot, followed by the distinct crack of a hand grenade. Guards shouted in German, running toward the disturbance. A second explosion followed, then scattered small arms fire, O'Reilly making their diversion look like a legitimate attack. Now, Carter ordered. They sprinted across the open ground, hunched low, boots silent on the frozen earth. The gap in the fence loomed before them, a darker shadow in the night. Carter went through first, then Walker, both pressing themselves against the wall of a supply shed as a pair of guards ran past, heading toward the commotion. Moving from shadow to shadow, they worked their way toward the dispatch station. The ongoing diversion had drawn most of the attention eastward, but the depot was still active, with soldiers moving purposefully between buildings. They reached the rear of the dispatch station undetected. A single window, partially covered with blackout material, offered a view inside. Carter peered through a small tear in the covering. 3 German soldiers manned radio equipment, while a 4th studied a large map spread across a central table. They looked alert but not alarmed. The diversion hadn't been deemed serious enough to disrupt their operations. "How do we get in?" Walker whispered. Carter spotted a rear door, likely leading to a storage area. "There. We'll place the charges. At the building support points, set them for 10 minutes. Walker nodded, readying the satchel charge and detonators he'd recovered. With practiced hands, he prepared the explosives while Carter kept watch. They crept to the rear door. It was locked, but the old construction yielded to Carter's knife with minimal noise. They slipped inside, finding themselves in a small storage room filled with maps, radio parts, and supply requisition forms. Through a partially open door, they could hear the German radio operators going about their business, unaware of the Americans, just feet away. Carter signaled to Walker, pointing to the support beams visible in the ceiling of the storage room. The Texan nodded, setting the first charge against the central beam. Carter moved to the doorway, ready to act if any of the Germans entered the storage area. Through the gap, he could see the radio equipment, the nerve center of the German supply operation. Destroy this, and the entire offensive would be thrown into disarray. Walker finished setting the first charge and moved to place the second. His foot caught the edge of a crate, sending a small avalanche of metal parts clattering to the floor. The Germans in the adjacent room fell silent. Carter froze, his hand on his knife. Walker pressed himself against the wall, the second charge still in his hands. "Was this?" A German voice called out. Footsteps approached the storage room door. Carter prepared to strike as the door swung open. A young German corporal stepped through, his eyes widening in shock at the sight of the 2 Americans. Before he could shout a warning, Carter grabbed him, clamping one hand over his mouth while driving his knife into the man's chest. The German struggled briefly, then went limp, but the damage was done. In the radio room, the other Germans had noticed their comrade's sudden silence. "Fritz? Alice in Ordnung?" Walker quickly placed the second charge, setting the timer. 10 minutes, he whispered to Carter. More footsteps approached. Carter dragged the dead German behind a stack of crates, then took position beside the door. When the next soldier entered, Carter struck again, but this time his target managed a strangled cry before falling. "Alarm! Eindringlinge!" The shout came from the radio room, followed by the clatter of equipment being knocked over as the remaining Germans reached for their weapons. "Cover's blown," Walker hissed. "We need to move." Carter knew their narrow window of opportunity was closing fast. "Out the back. Now!" They burst through the rear door just as gunfire erupted behind them. Bullets splintered the doorframe as they sprinted for the perimeter fence. Across the compound, they could see that O'Reilly's diversion had escalated into a genuine firefight, flashes of gunfire visible among the eastern buildings. Guards were now converging from multiple directions, alerted by the commotion at the dispatch station. Carter and Walker weaved between supply crates and vehicles, using whatever cover they could find. The gap in the fence seemed impossibly distant. They reached a fuel truck and paused behind it, catching their breath. Walker checked his watch. 8 minutes till detonation. "We need to link up with O'Reilly and the others," Carter said. "This whole place is going to be swarming soon." A spotlight swept across the ground nearby, nearly catching them in its beam. German voices called out, coordinating their search patterns. The initial confusion was giving way to organized response. "Lieutenant," Walker said suddenly, his voice tight. "Southeast corner, look." Carter peered around the edge of the truck. A staff car had pulled up at the main entrance of the depot, and officers were pouring out, barking orders. Among them, instantly recognizable from Richter's description, was Major Konrad Weiss. Even from a distance, there was something distinctly different about the German commander. While those around him moved with urgent haste, Weiss walked with measured calm, surveying the chaos with cold calculation. His uniform was immaculate, his posture rigid with military precision. He pointed toward the dispatch station, and soldiers rushed to obey his unheard command. That's him, Carter murmured. That's Weiss. Walker nodded grimly. Looks like the kind who'd execute his own mother if she violated regulations. They watched as Weiss assumed command of the situation, transforming the scattered response into a coordinated effort. Under his direction, guards formed search parties, methodically sweeping the compound in expanding circles. He's good, Carter acknowledged reluctantly. Too good. We need to move before they seal off the entire perimeter. They darted from the cover of the fuel truck to a stack of supply crates, pressing themselves into the shadows as a patrol passed, within yards of their position. The gap in the fence was still 100 yards away across increasingly open ground. Walker checked his watch again. 6 minutes. We'll never make it back to the fence, Carter realized. They've got too many men in the area now. So what's the play, Lieutenant? Carter studied their surroundings, looking for another way out. His gaze settled on a line of trucks parked near the southern gate. We steal a truck, he decided. Drive right out the main gate during the confusion when the charges blow. Walker's eyes widened slightly, then a ghost of a smile crossed his face. Bold. I like it. They changed direction, working their way toward the vehicle park. German soldiers ran past them, focused on the areas where intruders had already been spotted. No one was paying attention to two more figures in the darkness, particularly when one of them had pulled on a German jacket, taken during their earlier ambush. They reached the trucks without incident. Carter chose one near the end of the line, close to the gate. You drive, he told Walker. I'll cover. Walker slipped into the driver's seat, immediately working to hotwire the ignition. Carter kept watch, acutely aware of the minutes ticking away. 5 minutes to detonation. 4 minutes. 3. Got it, Walker whispered as the engine turned over with a low rumble. Ready when you are. Carter was about to climb in when movement caught his eye. A figure was striding purposefully toward their position, Major Weiss accompanied by 2 armed soldiers. The German commander had noticed the truck starting. We've got company, Carter warned. Stay down. He ducked behind the truck's hood, drawing his pistol. If Weiss came close enough, they might have a chance to eliminate the architect of the coming offensive. It would be worth the risk, even if it jeopardized their escape. Weiss stopped 20 yards away, studying the idling truck with narrowed eyes. He said something to one of his men, who immediately raised his rifle. Carter was about to shout a warning to Walker when a new sound split the night. Gunfire from the eastern perimeter, more intense than before. O'Reilly had escalated his diversion, perhaps realizing that Carter and Walker were in trouble. Weiss hesitated, turning toward the new threat. In that moment, Carter made his decision. He aimed carefully and fired twice at the German commander. The first shot missed. The second struck one of Weiss's soldiers, who crumpled to the ground. Weiss himself dropped into a crouch with impressive speed, returning fire with his sidearm. The bullet grazed Carter's arm, sending a hot line of pain across his bicep. Go, Carter shouted to Walker, firing again to keep Weiss pinned down. Walker gunned the engine, the truck lurching forward as Carter swung himself into the passenger seat. Bullets pinged off the metal body of the vehicle as they accelerated toward the gate. The guards at the gate were caught by surprise, confused by the truck barreling toward them from inside their own compound. One raised his rifle but hesitated to fire, unsure if these were fellow Germans attempting to respond to the attack. That hesitation was all Walker needed. He crashed through the partially opened gate, sending guards diving for cover. The truck bounced onto the dirt road beyond, engine roaring as Walker pushed it to its limits. In the side mirror, Carter could see Weiss standing in the gateway, his figure growing smaller but no less menacing. The German commander wasn't shooting anymore, just watching them escape with cold calculation. 1 minute to detonation. Head for the rendezvous point, Carter ordered, checking his wounded arm. The bullet had only grazed him. Painful but not serious. Walker nodded, wrestling with the unfamiliar vehicle as they sped down the dirt road. Behind them, German shouts and sporadic gunfire continued, but no immediate pursuit had been organized. Let's hope O'Reilly and the others made it out, Walker said. 30 seconds. They had just reached the edge of the forest when the night erupted into flame behind them. The charges detonated with a thunderous roar, sending a shockwave that rocked even their distant truck. Carter twisted in his seat to see the dispatch station vanish in a ball of fire. Secondary explosions following as the blaze reached stored ammunition. Walker let out a low whistle. That'll slow them down. They abandoned the truck a quarter mile, later continuing on foot toward the rendezvous point. The forest was alive with sound, distant shouting, vehicles on the move, the crackle of the burning depot behind them. They moved carefully, aware that German patrols would be scouring the woods. The rendezvous point was a small clearing marked by a distinctive lightning-struck pine. As they approached, Carter signaled for caution. Walker nodded, moving to circle, around and approach from a different angle. Carter advanced slowly, watching for any sign of his men or an ambush. The clearing appeared empty, bathed in dim moonlight filtering through the trees. "O'Reilly?" he called softly. "Graham?" A shadow detached itself from behind a fallen log. "Lieutenant?" Mikey's voice was a welcome sound. Carter stepped into the clearing. "It's me. Walker's coming around from the south." More movement revealed Richter and Graham, the latter propped against a tree, his wounded leg stretched out before him. Of O'Reilly, there was no sign. "Where's the sergeant?" Carter asked, dread building in his stomach. "Not back yet," Mikey reported. "We heard the explosions. Did you—" "Mission accomplished," Carter confirmed. "But we need to move soon. The entire area will be swarming with German patrols." Walker emerged from the trees on the opposite side of the clearing. No sign of pursuit yet, but it won't take them long to organize search parties. Carter checked his watch. 20 minutes past the rendezvous time. O'Reilly should have been here by now. "We'll wait 5 more minutes," he decided. "Then we have to move, with or without him." Those 5 minutes stretched into an eternity of strained listening and growing concern. Every distant sound might be O'Reilly approaching, or German soldiers closing in. "Lieutenant," Graham spoke up, his voice weak but determined. "We need to go." Sergeant would say the same. Carter knew he was right, but the thought of abandoning O'Reilly felt like a personal failure. The Irishman had been with him since the beginning, his steady presence a counterbalance to Carter's own doubts. "1 more minute," he insisted. As if in answer to his silent prayer, branches cracked at the edge of the clearing. Everyone tensed, weapons raised. A figure stumbled forward, O'Reilly, his face streaked with blood and soot, supporting a limping Walker. "Tex!" Carter moved forward to help. "What happened?" The Texan's face was gray with pain, his left leg soaked with blood from thigh to boot. "Caught some shrapnel during exfil," he managed through gritted teeth. "O'Reilly found me, got me out. They eased Walker to the ground, where Mikey immediately began examining the wound. Carter turned to O'Reilly, who was breathing heavily from the exertion of supporting Walker's weight. "Didn't think you'd make it," Carter admitted. O'Reilly straightened, wiping blood from a cut above his eye. "Nearly didn't. Those charges set off the ammunition dump, whole eastern side of the camp went up." "What about pursuit?" "They're organizing it now," O'Reilly reported grimly. "But they're split between firefighting and hunting us. Won't last long, though. Weiss will have them after us soon enough." Carter nodded, turning to assess their situation. 2 seriously wounded men, Graham and now Walker. Richter still moving but slowed by his injury. O'Reilly exhausted but functional. Mikey showing surprising composure as he bandaged Walker's leg. And himself, nursing a minor wound that nonetheless added to the collective burden of their battered squad. "How bad is it?" he asked Mikey, nodding toward Walker's leg. "Shrapnel caught him in the thigh," Mikey replied, working with newfound confidence. "Missed the artery, but it's deep. He's lost blood, and there's still metal in there that needs to come out." Walker managed a tight smile. "I'll live. Just might slow us down a bit." Carter made his decision. "We move north. There's an Allied aid station about 8 miles from here, according to our maps. If we push through the night, we might reach it by dawn." 8 miles? O'Reilly looked pointedly at Walker and Graham. "With 2 men who can barely walk?" "We'll make it," Carter said with more conviction than he felt. We've come this far. O'Reilly looked like he might argue, but instead, he simply nodded. You heard the lieutenant. On your feet. They organized themselves for the journey. O'Reilly and Mikey supporting Walker, while Carter and Richter helped Graham. It was slow going, each step a struggle against pain, exhaustion, and the ever-present threat of discovery. Behind them, the glow of the burning depot lit the night sky, evidence of their small victory against overwhelming odds. But Carter knew it was only a temporary disruption. The German offensive might be delayed, but it would still come. Their mission remained the same: reach Allied lines and warn command of what was coming. As they moved deeper into the forest, Carter found himself walking beside Richter. The German officer's face was drawn with pain, but his eyes remained alert and determined. You were right about Weiss, Carter told him quietly. I saw him. The way he took control, the way his men responded to him. He's dangerous, Richter nodded. He is a product of our time, efficient, ruthless, devoted to the cause above all else. He glanced at Carter. But tonight, you proved something. Small actions can have large consequences. If we get this intelligence back, Carter replied. If we warn command in time. You will, Richter said with surprising certainty. Because you understand what Weiss does not. And what's that? That strength lies not in ruthlessness, but in the bonds between men who fight for each other as much as for their cause. Carter considered this, watching his battered squad struggling forward through the darkness. They had every reason to give up, to surrender to despair or self-preservation, yet they continued, bound by something stronger than military discipline or patriotic duty. The night grew colder as they pushed northward. Walker's condition deteriorated, his face growing paler as blood continued to seep through his bandages despite Mikey's best efforts. Graham remained stoically silent, but his labored breathing betrayed the toll each step took on him. O'Reilly, sensing Carter's concern, fell back to walk beside him. Walker needs proper medical attention, he said bluntly. Soon. I know, Carter replied. But we can't stop, not now. You're pushing them too hard, O'Reilly warned. We could take shelter, rest, continue after. After Weiss catches up to us, Carter interrupted. After the offensive begins and thousands die because we failed to warn them. No, Sergeant, we keep moving. O'Reilly's face hardened. You're going to get them all killed, Lieutenant. Is that worth it? Is the mission worth every single one of us? The question hung between them, the fundamental disagreement that had been building since the ambush. Carter believed in completing the mission at all costs. O'Reilly believed in preserving his men first. I don't want to lose anyone else, Carter said quietly. But this is bigger than us. You know that. O'Reilly didn't respond immediately when he finally spoke. His voice was low and intense. I've followed you this far, Lieutenant. But if Walker or Graham dies because you pushed them beyond their limits, that's on you. Not the mission, not the Germans. You. He moved away before Carter could respond, returning to help support Walker. The sergeant's words stung, not because they were unfair, but because they articulated Carter's own deepest fear, that his determination to complete the mission was driving his men toward death as surely as any German bullet. They continued through the night, each step taking them closer to Allied lines but demanding a terrible price in pain and exhaustion. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit grew, distant vehicles, occasional gunfire, the faint baying of dogs. Weiss was coming, his hunt renewed with greater purpose after their attack on the depot. Dawn was still hours away. The darkness pressed in around them, filled with threats both real and imagined. Carter felt the weight of command more heavily than ever, aware that every decision he made now could mean life or death for the men who followed him. As they crossed a small stream, Walker's leg finally gave out. The Texan collapsed, nearly pulling O'Reilly down with him. Even in the dim light, Carter could see that Walker was at his limit, face gray with pain and blood loss, eyes struggling to focus. Need to rest, Walker managed through chattering teeth. Carter knelt beside him, feeling for his pulse. It was rapid and weak, classic signs of shock. They needed to stop the bleeding, warm him up, give him time to recover. But stopping meant surrendering their lead over the pursuing Germans. The moment of decision had arrived, and with it, the true test of Carter's leadership. Would he risk one man's life for the sake of the mission? Or would he risk the mission for the sake of one man? O'Reilly watched him, the challenge clear in his eyes. Mikey looked up from where he was checking Walker's bandages, his young face drawn with worry. Graham, himself barely able to stand, waited silently for Carter's decision, and Richter observed it all, a witness to this quintessential moment of command. Carter made his choice, one that would define him as a leader and as a man, for better or worse. "We stop," he said, "just long enough to stabilize him. Mikey, do what you can for Walker's leg. O'Reilly, set up a perimeter with Graham. Richter, help me find something to make a stretcher." Relief washed over O'Reilly's face, quickly replaced by renewed determination. "Yes, sir." As they worked to create a makeshift stretcher from branches and jackets, Carter felt Richter watching him. Weiss would not have stopped, the German observed quietly. "I'm not Weiss," Carter replied, lashing branches together with strips torn from his undershirt. "No," Richter agreed. "And that is why you will defeat him." Carter wasn't sure he believed that, but he knew one thing with absolute certainty. Whatever happened next, they would face it together. As a unit, as brothers in arms. And perhaps that, more than any tactical advantage or strategic brilliance, was their greatest strength against the darkness closing in around them. Dawn crept over the Ardennes with reluctant gray light, revealing a stone church nestled among frost-covered pines. Its steeple, partially collapsed from earlier fighting, still reached skyward like a broken finger pointing accusingly at heaven. This sanctuary, abandoned and battle-scarred, had become the temporary refuge for Carter's battered squad. Inside, colored light filtered through damaged, stained glass, painting Walker's pale face in muted reds and blues as Mikey changed his bandages. The Texan's condition had stabilized somewhat after their brief rest, but he remained weak from blood loss, his normally steady hands now trembling slightly. Graham sat nearby, his own wounded leg stretched before him, cleaning his rifle with mechanical precision. The pain had etched permanent lines around his eyes, yet he worked silently, refusing to acknowledge his suffering. O'Reilly stood by a shattered window, scanning the surrounding forest with narrowed eyes. His posture was rigid with tension, shoulders squared against invisible weight. Since their escape from the depot, the sergeant's barely contained frustration had transformed into open resentment. Carter spread their maps across a dusty altar, studying possible routes to Allied lines. The success of their depot raid had bought them time, but also intensified the German hunt. Every path forward seemed blocked by enemy patrols. "It's 3 miles to the Allied radio outpost," Carter said, breaking the tense silence. "If we push hard, we could reach it by midday." O'Reilly turned from the window, his face hardening. "Push hard? Look around you, Lieutenant. Walker can barely stand. Graham's not much better. We've got maybe 20 rounds between us." He gestured around the church. "This isn't a unit anymore. It's the walking wounded." Carter straightened, feeling the weight of every sleepless hour. "The mission isn't over, Sergeant." "The mission?" O'Reilly's laugh was bitter and sharp. "The mission was compromised the moment we walked into that ambush. Everything since has been pure survival. We have critical intelligence." "Intelligence? That's probably already obsolete." O'Reilly's voice rose, echoing through the church. "We blew up their supply depot, remember? Weiss is adaptable, he's already adjusting his plans." The sergeant approached the altar, eyes locked with Carter's. "You want to know what I think, Lieutenant? I think the best we can do now is split up. Each man for himself. Some of us might make it back that way." The words hung in the air, giving voice to the unthinkable, abandoning the mission, abandoning each other. From his position against a column, Richter spoke quietly. "Splitting up would be exactly what Weiss expects. It would make hunting you easier." O'Reilly rounded on him. Shut your mouth, Kraut. You're the reason we're in this mess. No, Richter replied evenly. Your faulty intelligence is why you're in this mess. I am why some of you might still survive it. Walker coughed weakly from his makeshift bed. He's right, O'Reilly. Splitting up is suicide. So is staying together. O'Reilly turned back to Carter, stepping closer until they were inches apart. You're leading these men to their deaths for what? So you can tell yourself you completed the mission? So you can wash away the guilt of walking us into an ambush? Carter felt something snap inside him, days of doubt, fear, and exhaustion crystallizing into pure anger. His fist connected with O'Reilly's jaw before he even realized he'd thrown the punch. The sergeant staggered back, momentarily shocked, then lunged forward. They collided against the altar, maps scattering as they grappled. Carter took a hard blow to the ribs, then another to his wounded arm, pain flaring white-hot. Stop it. Mikey's voice cracked with tension. They'll hear us. Neither man listened, too consumed by the release of days of built-up tension. O'Reilly, stronger and more experienced in hand-to-hand combat, pinned Carter against the altar, his forearm pressed against the lieutenant's throat. You're no leader, O'Reilly hissed. A real leader knows when to cut his losses. Carter struggled for breath, then managed to hook a leg behind O'Reilly's knee, throwing him off balance. They tumbled to the stone floor, rolling among scattered prayer books and broken glass. It was Richter who finally separated them, inserting himself between the two Americans with surprising strength despite his wound. Enough, the German ordered. This is what destroys units. This is what Weiss counts on. Both men backed away, breathing heavily. Blood trickled from a cut on Carter's lip. O'Reilly's eye was already swelling. The church fell silent except for their ragged breathing. Walker watched with glazed eyes, his condition a living reminder of their increasingly desperate situation. Graham had not moved during the entire confrontation, but his knuckles were white around his rifle. Carter wiped blood from his mouth, then straightened his torn jacket with as much dignity as he could muster. When he spoke, his voice was low, but unwavering. I am still in command of this unit. We will complete our mission. We will deliver the intelligence we have gathered, and we will do it together. He looked each man in the eye, ending with O'Reilly. I don't care if you hate me. I don't care if you think I'm wrong. But you will follow orders, Sergeant, or I will shoot you myself for desertion under fire. Something in his tone, the absolute certainty, the steel beneath the exhaustion, reached through O'Reilly's anger. The sergeant held Carter's gaze for a long moment, then gave a curt nod. Yes, sir. The immediate crisis had passed. But the fracture, in their unity, remained, a tangible presence in the cold church air. Mikey, who had watched the confrontation with wide eyes, returned to Walker's side. His fever's getting worse, he reported quietly. The wound's infected. Carter knelt beside the Texan, touching his forehead. Walker's skin burned beneath his fingers, his breathing shallow and labored. I'm still good, Walker insisted, though his voice betrayed him with its weakness. Just need a minute to catch my breath. You need proper medical attention, Carter replied. We all do. He stood, facing the grim reality of their situation. They couldn't stay in the church indefinitely, but moving with two severely wounded men would slow them to a crawl, making them easy targets. Richter approached, his expression troubled. Lieutenant, may I speak with you privately? Carter followed the German officer to a small alcove once used for confessions. Richter's face was grave in the dim light filtering through a cracked stained glass window. Weiss will find us soon, Richter said without preamble. He is methodical, thorough. He will have teams searching every building, every structure. We'll be gone before then, Carter replied, but the words sounded hollow even to his own ears. I have another option, Richter continued, something that might give your men a chance. He paused. Let me go to Weiss. Surrender myself. Carter stared at him. You'd be signing your own death warrant. Yes, Richter acknowledged. But it would draw his attention, his resources. Weiss wants me even more than he wants you. A German officer who betrays his oath is more valuable than any American intelligence. You're asking me to send you to your death, Carter said. I'm asking you to let me make my own choice, Richter corrected him. My redemption, if such a thing exists for me, doesn't lie in escaping. It lies in ensuring Weiss cannot complete his plans. Carter studied the German, seeing beyond the enemy uniform to the man beneath. Conflicted, honorable in his own way, seeking absolution for sins Carter could only imagine. I can't ask that of you. You aren't asking, Richter said simply. I'm offering, for your men, for the thousands who will die if Weiss succeeds. Before Carter could respond, O'Reilly's urgent voice called from the main chapel. Lieutenant, movement in the trees to the north. Carter rushed back, joining O'Reilly at the window. Through breaks in the forest, he could see German soldiers, advancing in formation. Not a random patrol, but a coordinated force. They found us, O'Reilly confirmed grimly. At least a platoon, maybe more. Carter's mind raced. They were trapped, the church becoming a potential tomb rather than sanctuary. How long? 10 minutes, maybe less. Carter turned to find his entire squad watching him. Walker propped up on an elbow, Graham with his rifle ready, Mikey trying to hide his fear, O'Reilly waiting for orders despite their fight, and Richter standing slightly apart, his offer hanging between them. There's a decision to make, Carter said, and not much time to make it. Walker spoke up, his voice weak but determined. Whatever the call, Lieutenant, we're with you. Carter felt the weight of command settle more firmly on his shoulders. These men had followed him through hell. They deserved a chance, however slim. He turned to Richter. If you do this, what's your plan? I will approach from the east, away, from your escape route, the German replied. I will tell them I escaped from you, that I have information about your movements. Weiss will want to interrogate me personally. And then? Richter's smile was grim. And then I die. But not quickly, and not without taking as much of Weiss's attention as possible. The brutality of war distilled to its essence. One life traded, for many. Carter had made similar calculations before, but never with someone volunteering to be the sacrifice. There's a crypt, Graham spoke up suddenly. Found it earlier. Under the altar. Looks like it might lead out beyond the church grounds. Carter made his decision. O'Reilly checked the crypt. Walker, can you move? The Texan nodded, though pain flickered across his face. Just get me on my feet. Mikey, help Walker. Graham, gather what supplies we have left. Carter turned back to Richter. I don't like this plan. It's not about liking it, Richter replied. It's about necessity. O'Reilly returned from examining the crypt. Tunnel leads about 50 yards out, emerges in a small cemetery to the west. Might give us a chance if they're focused on the church. The sound of German voices grew closer, advance elements reaching the edge of the clearing where the church stood. Carter extended his hand to Richter. I won't forget this. The German clasped it firmly. Complete your mission, Lieutenant, that will be enough. Their eyes met in a moment of understanding that transcended uniforms and allegiances. Two soldiers bound by the strange brotherhood that sometimes emerges between enemies who recognize each other's humanity. Richter checked his wound, straightened his tattered uniform as best he could, then moved toward the church's side door. Give me 5 minutes before you move. Weiss will want to verify my story before committing his forces. He paused at the door, looking back at the Americans one last time. It has been an honor, gentlemen. Then he was gone, slipping out into the gray morning light. Carter turned to his men. 5 minutes, then we move. Take only what you absolutely need. They worked quickly, helping Walker to his feet, distributing their meager remaining ammunition. Carter refolded their maps, tucking them securely inside his jacket alongside the intelligence documents that had cost so many lives. Through a window, he watched Richter emerge from the trees to the east, hands raised. German soldiers surrounded him immediately, weapons trained on his chest. One struck him with a rifle butt, driving him to his knees. Even from a distance, Carter could see the German officer's posture remain dignified despite the rough treatment. 4 minutes, he told his men quietly. O'Reilly had moved the altar, revealing stone steps descending into darkness. Tunnels clear but narrow. We'll need to go single file. I'll take point, Carter decided. Then Walker with Mikey, Graham. Next, O'Reilly covering our rear. The sergeant nodded, their earlier fight seemingly forgotten in the face of immediate danger. Sir, about before... Later, Sergeant, Carter cut him off. If we live through this. A shout from outside drew their attention. Through the windows, they could see a staff car pulling up to the church perimeter. A tall officer emerged. Major Weiss, instantly recognizable by his precise movements and the deference shown by the soldiers around him. Weiss approached Richter, who remained kneeling in the dirt. Words were exchanged, too distant to hear. Then Weiss drew his sidearm and pressed it against Richter's temple. Carter tensed, expecting the execution to be immediate. Instead, Weiss lowered the weapon and gestured toward the church. Orders were shouted, and soldiers began to move into position around the building. He didn't kill him, O'Reilly observed. That means he believes him at least partially. Or he wants to make an example of him later, Carter replied grimly. Either way, our time's up. Get to the crypt. They had just reached the stone steps when the first shots shattered the remaining stained glass windows. German soldiers were firing from multiple positions, pouring suppressing fire into the church before their assault. Go, Carter urged, pushing Mikey and Walker toward the crypt. Entrance. Move. Graham followed, sliding awkwardly down the steps with his wounded leg. O'Reilly took position behind an overturned pew, returning fire to cover their retreat. The Germans breached the main door, storming in with practiced efficiency. O'Reilly's rifle cracked twice, dropping the first men through the entrance. Return fire splintered the pew, forcing him to roll to new cover. Carter fired from beside the altar, trying to give O'Reilly time to reach the crypt. Sergeant, fall back now. O'Reilly moved in a crouching run toward the altar, bullets tracking his path across the stone floor. He had almost reached the crypt entrance when a new sound cut through the gunfire, the distinctive whoosh of a flamethrower igniting. Through the doorway, Carter glimpsed a German soldier with the weapon strapped to his back, its nozzle already spewing liquid fire. The flames caught the wooden pews, spreading with terrifying speed through the dry, ancient timber. Down the steps, Carter shouted as smoke began to fill the church. He fired his last rounds at the flamethrower operator, then turned to follow. O'Reilly. A bullet struck the sergeant high in the back just as he reached the crypt entrance. He stumbled, fell forward down the steps. Carter caught him, dragging him into the tunnel as flames roared overhead. The crypt was narrow and low, forcing them to move in a hunched position through decades of dust and cobwebs. Carter led, supporting O'Reilly, who moved with grim determination despite the blood soaking his jacket. How bad? Carter asked as they stumbled forward. Bad enough, O'Reilly replied through clenched teeth. Keep moving. They caught up to the others, who had been slowed by Walker's condition. The Texan was barely conscious now, supported between Mikey and Graham, his feet dragging on the rough stone floor. Above them, they could hear the church collapsing as the fire consumed it. The tunnel grew hotter, smoke seeping through cracks in the ancient stonework. They pushed on, lungs burning, eyes watering, each step a victory against pain and exhaustion. After what seemed an eternity, Carter felt cool air on his face. The tunnel widened, then opened into a small, overgrown cemetery. Ancient headstones, tilted by time and weather, offered minimal cover as they emerged into the gray daylight. Keep low, Carter ordered, helping O'Reilly out of the tunnel. The forest is 30 yards ahead. They moved as quickly as their wounded allowed, using the headstones for cover. Behind them, smoke billowed from the church, now fully engulfed, in flames. German soldiers surrounded the burning building, unaware that their quarry had escaped. They had almost reached the tree line when Walker collapsed. The Texan's strength, sustained by sheer willpower for hours, finally gave out. He fell, to his knees, then forward onto the cold ground. Can't, he gasped. Can't feel my legs. Mikey tried to lift him, but Walker had gone limp, his fever-ravaged body surrendering to the infection that had been consuming him from inside. We carry him, Carter decided, moving to take Walker's shoulders. A shout from behind froze them in. Place. One of the German soldiers had spotted movement at the edge of the cemetery. He raised his rifle, calling to his comrades. "Get to the trees," O'Reilly ordered, pushing Carter toward Walker. "I'll hold them here." Carter stared at him, understanding, immediately. "Sergeant," "Not up for debate, Lieutenant." O'Reilly's face was pale from blood loss, but his eyes were clear and determined. "You're the one with the intelligence. You're the one who needs to make it back." Without waiting for a response, O'Reilly took position behind a large headstone, chambering his last rounds. "Been an honor serving with you, sir. Now go, complete the mission." There was no time for goodbyes. German soldiers were moving toward the cemetery, alerted by their comrades' shout. Carter and Mikey lifted Walker between them, while Graham provided covering fire with his last magazine. O'Reilly opened up, his rifle cracks drawing immediate return fire. The diversion worked. The Germans focused on the immediate threat rather than the shadows moving at the edge of the woods. Carter, Mikey, and Graham reached the tree line with Walker. As they struggled deeper into the forest, Carter looked back, one last time. O'Reilly was still firing even as bullets chipped away at his stone cover. The sergeant adjusted his position, exposing himself momentarily to take better aim. In that moment, multiple German rifles found their mark. O'Reilly jerked with the impact, but incredibly remained upright, squeezing off another shot before finally slumping against the headstone. Through the smoke and chaos, Carter saw a tall figure stride into the cemetery, Major Weiss, pistol in hand. The German commander approached O'Reilly's position with clinical detachment, checked that the IGAS sergeant was immobile, then fired once more at point-blank range. Carter felt the execution like a physical blow. He wanted to go back, to somehow save the man who had been his right hand through this entire ordeal, his counterbalance, his conscience. But O'Reilly had made his choice, the same choice Carter would have made in his position. "Lieutenant, we have to move," Graham urged, his voice thick with emotion. "They'll be coming." Carter tore his gaze from the cemetery and turned toward the forest depths. Their squad, once 8 strong, had been reduced to 4, Carter, Mikey, Graham, and Walker, the latter hanging between consciousness and oblivion. Somewhere, behind them, Richter faced whatever fate Weiss had in store for him. O'Reilly lay dead among the headstones, his final act of defiance buying them these precious minutes of escape. The mission, which had seemed so straightforward days ago, had exacted a terrible cost. But it wasn't over, not while they still breathed, not while they carried the intelligence that might save thousands. 3 miles to the radio outpost, Carter said, adjusting Walker's weight against his shoulder. "We make it there. We complete the mission." Mikey, his young face streaked with tears and soot, nodded silently. Graham checked his rifle, finding only 3 rounds remaining. They moved deeper into the forest, the sound of pursuit fading temporarily behind them. The morning sun broke through the clouds at last, casting long shadows through the trees. Carter knew the reprieve was temporary. Weiss would reorganize, would track them again. It was a race now, a final desperate push to reach Allied lines before the German commander caught them one last time. Walker stirred against Carter's shoulder, muttering something incoherent. His skin burned with fever, his breathing increasingly labored. How long he would last without medical attention was impossible to know. "Hang on, Tex," Carter told him. "Just a little further." The Texan's eyes fluttered open, focusing with effort. "O'Reilly?" he asked weakly. Carter couldn't bring himself to say it aloud. His expression was answer enough. Walker closed his eyes again, a single tear tracking through the dirt on his face. "Don't waste it," he whispered. "Don't waste what he did." "I won't," Carter promised, both to Walker and to himself. "We'll get this intelligence back if it's the last thing we do." The 3 men continued through the forest, carrying their wounded comrade, bearing the weight of those they had lost, driven by the promise of what their sacrifice might mean. Behind them, smoke from the burning church rose like a black pillar against the morning sky, a monument to fallen comrades and the brutal cost of war. Midday sun cut through the forest, canopy as Carter, Mikey, and Graham struggled forward, carrying Walker between them. The radio outpost lay just beyond the next ridge, their final hope of warning Allied command before the German offensive began. Walker drifted in and out of consciousness, his fever raging. Graham wasn't much better, each step on his wounded leg a grimace of pain. Only Mikey seemed to have found reserves of strength, the young soldier's face set with determination that would have been unimaginable days earlier. "We're close," Carter encouraged them, though his own strength was failing. O'Reilly's death weighed on him like physical weight. The sergeant's final stand at the cemetery seared into his memory. They crested the ridge, and there it was, a small, concrete bunker partially hidden by camouflage netting. The Allied radio outpost they'd been fighting toward for days. It appeared abandoned, likely evacuated during the recent German advance. "Thank God," Graham whispered. Carter raised a hand, signaling caution. "Could be a trap. Mikey, help me get Walker to cover. Graham, watch our backs." They settled Walker against a tree. The Texan's face was gray, his breathing shallow. "Did we make it?" he asked, barely audible. "Almost," Carter assured him. "Just hold on a little longer." Carter approached the bunker carefully, checking for tripwires or signs of enemy presence. Finding none, he signaled the others forward. The bunker door was locked but yielded to a few solid kicks. Inside, the outpost was small but well-equipped. Radio gear still intact, emergency supplies stacked neatly against one wall. A quick search confirmed they were alone. "Get Walker inside," Carter ordered. "Graham, help Mikey set up the radio. I'll secure the perimeter." As they worked, Carter did a final check of the vital intelligence they'd sacrificed so much to deliver. Richter's documents showing the German offensive positions, the maps they'd collected, their own observations of troop movements. Everything that might give Allied command the edge they needed to counter the coming attack. Graham collapsed into a chair, his wounded leg finally giving out. "I can't," he began, then shook his head. "I'm sorry, Lieutenant." "You've done enough," Carter assured him. "Rest now." Mikey had the radio powered up, his hands moving with surprising confidence across the dials. "Ready when you are, sir." Carter took the handset, adjusting the frequency to the emergency Allied channel. "This is Pathfinder 6, calling any Allied station. Priority message. Over." Static greeted him, then a faint voice broke through. "Reading you, Pathfinder. This is Fox Charlie Base. Over." Relief washed over Carter. "Fox Charlie, we have critical intelligence on imminent German offensive. Preparing to transmit coordinates and strength assessments." "Understood, Pathfinder." "Standing by." Carter began, relaying the information. Troop concentrations, armor positions, the timing of the attack scheduled for dawn the next day. Mikey kept the signal clear, adjusting as interference threatened to break their tenuous connection. Walker, propped against the wall, watched with feverish eyes. "We did it," he murmured. "We actually did it." As Carter continued his transmission, Graham suddenly tensed by the observation slit. "Movement," he warned. "Multiple contacts approaching from the south." Carter's heart sank. They'd been found, so close to completing their mission. "How many?" "At least a platoon," Graham reported grimly. "And a staff car. Looks like Weiss himself." Carter continued transmitting, speaking faster now. "Fox Charlie, be advised we are about to be engaged by enemy forces. Please confirm you have received all transmitted intelligence." The radio crackled. "Affirmative, Pathfinder. All data received. Command says to hold position if possible. Relief force is already mobilizing based on your intelligence." "Understood," Carter replied. "Pathfinder 6 out." He turned to his men. "They got it. The mission is complete." A bullet pinged off the bunker's exterior, followed by several more. The Germans had them surrounded. "Final stand," Walker whispered, attempting to sit up straighter. "Just like Davy Crockett at the Alamo." "Except we've already won," Carter corrected him. "We just need to hold long enough for command to act on our information." Graham checked. Their ammunition, pitiful, barely 20 rounds between them. "Won't be long," he observed dryly. Outside, a German voice called through a megaphone. "American soldiers, you are surrounded. Surrender now, and you will be treated according to the Geneva Convention." Carter recognized the voice. Weiss himself, calm and assured even now. He exchanged glances with his men. Surrender meant the mission was truly accomplished, might even mean medical attention for Walker and Graham. But it also meant placing themselves at the mercy of a commander known for ruthlessness. Before Carter could respond, Walker spoke up. "Don't trust him, Lieutenant. Men like Weiss don't take prisoners. They make examples." Graham nodded in agreement. Better to go down fighting. Mikey, who had been silent, suddenly stood straighter. "We finish what we started. For O'Reilly. For Richter." Carter felt a surge of pride in these men. Broken, exhausted, but unbowed. "Positions," he ordered. "Make every shot count." The German assault began methodically, suppressing fire from multiple positions, forcing them away from the observation slits. Carter, Graham, and Mikey returned fire sparingly, knowing each bullet was precious. Walker, too weak to stand, had propped himself against the wall with his rifle across his lap. "Save me one round," he requested quietly, "just in case." Carter understood. Some fates were worse than death. He nodded grimly. The German fire intensified. A bullet found its way through a narrow slit, striking Graham in the shoulder. He grunted, but maintained his position, firing back with his good arm. "They're moving closer," Mikey reported, trying to get a demolition charge to the door. Carter spotted the German soldiers rushing forward with the explosive. He took careful aim and dropped the lead man. The others fell back temporarily. A new barrage hit the bunker. Heavy weapons now, the concrete starting to crack under the onslaught. They couldn't hold much longer. Inside the small space, the air grew thick with dust and the smell of cordite. Walker's breathing had become more labored, each inhalation a struggle. Graham's fresh wound bled freely, his face growing paler by the minute. "Lieutenant," Walker called weakly. "My rifle. Bring it here." Carter knelt beside the Texan, concerned by the sudden clarity in his feverish eyes. "What is it?" "I see him," Walker whispered. "Weiss, by the staff car, in range." Carter looked through the observation slit. The German commander stood partially, exposed, directing his men with confident gestures, apparently unconcerned about American fire given their dwindling ammunition. "Let me take this shot," Walker requested, a final plea. "One last chance to make a difference." Carter hesitated, then helped position Walker's rifle through the narrow opening. The Texan's hands trembled violently, his strength nearly gone. "I need help," Walker admitted. "Steady me." Carter braced Walker's shoulder while Mikey supported the rifle barrel. The Texan's breathing slowed as he focused through his scope, calling upon reserves of will that defied his physical condition. "For the boys we lost," Walker whispered, and squeezed the trigger. The rifle cracked. Through the observation slit, Carter watched as Weiss staggered, a hand flying to his throat where Walker's bullet had found its mark. The German commander collapsed, his officers rushing to his side in panic. "Got him," Walker said, a faint smile crossing his pain-etched face. "Told you I was still good?" He sagged against Carter, the rifle slipping from his fingers. The effort had cost him his last strength. "Tex?" Mikey's voice cracked with emotion. Walker's eyes fluttered. "Been an honor," he managed. "Tell my folks. Tell them I didn't die afraid." His body went slack, the fever and blood loss finally claiming what his determination had held at bay for so long. The ranger from Texas was gone, his final shot his legacy. Carter gently closed Walker's eyes, a wordless goodbye to a man who had followed him through hell without complaint. There was no time for proper mourning. The German attack continued despite Weiss's fall, perhaps even more frenzied now, driven by rage and revenge. A massive explosion rocked the bunker, part of the roof collapsing inward. Graham was caught. Under falling debris, a cry of pain cut short as dust filled the small space. "Graham!" Mikey called, struggling toward the fallen soldier. Another explosion followed, the door blasting inward. German soldiers would be through any second. Carter pulled Mikey back. "He's gone," he said, the words bitter in his mouth. "Another man lost. another name to carry. They retreated to the farthest corner of the bunker, weapons ready for a final stand. Carter had 3 rounds left, Mikey just 2. It would be over quickly. German voices approached the shattered doorway. Carter raised his pistol, determined to make each shot count. Then, impossibly, a new sound cut through the chaos. The distinctive whistle and boom of Allied artillery. Shells began landing among the German positions, precision fire that spoke of careful targeting. The German advance faltered, then broke. Through the shattered bunker, Carter could see enemy soldiers retreating, dragging their wounded with them. Officers shouted contradictory orders, the chain of command in disarray with Weiss dead. The relief force, Carter realized. Command must have acted immediately on our intelligence. More shells landed, walking steadily through the German positions. In the distance, the rumble of tanks and the distinctive sound of American M3 half-tracks grew louder. Within minutes, American soldiers were pouring through the forest, securing the area around the bunker. A medic was the first to reach them, eyes widening at the sight of Carter and Mikey amidst the bodies of their comrades. "Lieutenant Carter," the medic asked. "Command said you might still be alive. Said you sent intelligence that's changed the whole battle plan." Carter nodded numbly, the sudden transition from certain death to rescue too abrupt for his exhausted mind to process. More soldiers entered, gently moving Walker's body, digging Graham from beneath the rubble on the slim chance he might still be alive. The medic turned his attention to Mikey, who had a wound Carter hadn't even noticed. A bullet grazed across his arm. "It's over," the medic told them. "You made it, did they?" Carter wondered. His squad, once 8 men strong, had been reduced to himself and Mikey. O'Reilly dead at the cemetery. Richter, fate unknown but certainly grim. Walker, his last breath spent killing the enemy who had hunted them. Graham, crushed in the final moments of their stand. The others, lost in the initial ambush that seemed a lifetime ago. A young lieutenant approached, offering a canteen. "Sir, command is already adjusting our defensive positions based on your intelligence. They're saying you may have saved thousands of lives." Carter took the water automatically, the words barely registering. Thousands of lives saved. Was that a fair trade for the men he'd lost? Was any calculus of war ever truly balanced? They were evacuated shortly after, loaded onto a jeep that bounced through the forest toward American lines. As they drove, Carter caught glimpses of Allied forces mobilizing, tanks moving into position, artillery being repositioned, infantry digging in along the very approaches Richter had warned about. Beside him, Mikey sat in silence, something clutched tightly in his fist. Carter realized they were Walker's dog tags retrieved before they left the bunker. "He was a good man," Carter said softly. "They all were." Mikey nodded, his young face aged years in the span of days. "Do you think it was worth it, sir?" Carter had no easy answer. The mission was accomplished, the intelligence delivered, lives would be saved, but the cost had been terrible, paid in the blood of good men. "I don't know," he admitted finally. "I just know they gave everything so others might live. That has to count for something." They crested a hill, and the full Allied position came into view, a massive mobilization spurred by their warning. In the valley below, the ground Weiss had intended to attack through was now bristling with American defenses, the German advantage of surprise completely neutralized. Carter looked back toward the horizon where their journey had begun. Somewhere back there, the bodies of his men lay in frozen ground, O'Reilly in the cemetery, Walker in the bunker. The others scattered across the Ardennes, markers of their desperate passage. He had led them into that hell. He had pushed them beyond endurance. And now he alone would carry the memories of what they had sacrificed, the burden of survival when others had fallen. The mission was a success, but as the jeep carried them toward safety, Lieutenant James Carter wondered if any victory was worth such a cost, and if he would ever truly find peace with the decisions he had made in those frozen forests behind enemy lines. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.